Romeo and Juliet, Act 3, Scene 5, Part 2. I think at this point we should talk a little bit about suicide and suicide prevention. One of the things that people on a suicide prevention watch list are asked to do is to ask people who are their spheres of influence, who are the people that influence them in their lives, with whom they can confide. And you look at Juliet and you realize that her life is pretty insular. She's pretty insulated. I would suggest that her father probably is the furthest outside influence in her life, followed by her mother in the next ring, followed by the nurse, and then Juliet herself has her own wits about her. We've seen those spheres of influence, those circles of influence collapse upon Juliet in this scene. Her father has told her if she doesn't do what he wants her to do, that she'll be disowned, never look upon his face again, leave his house, he says. She can hang, beg, starve, die in the streets for all he cares. Her mother, who is afraid of her father, tells Juliet, well, you're on your own. You need to do what your father says to do. Talk to me no more. I'll not speak a word, she says. So then she turns to her best friend, her nurse, literally the person who was her nurse maid from the time she was born. The person who has been her closest confidant, the person to whom she always goes with any story or any secret. So she turns to the nurse, and the nurse betrays her. Basically tells her that what she ought to do is marry Paris, even though the nurse literally was at the wedding of Juliet and Romeo earlier in this the day before, and knows that they just spent the night together as husband and wife. After the nurse says this to Juliet, so what people tell us is, people who know about suicide and suicide prevention, is that when we see those spheres of influence collapsing upon someone and they get desperate, that's when they are most likely um, suicidal, literally suicidal, not just talking about it, but actually suicidal. What will Juliet do? To whom will she turn? She's already twice threatened suicide, once in a sort of a joking manner, if he be married, my grave is like to be my wedding bed. But then she said that you may as well um, make my marriage bed in the same monument, the same dim monument where Tybalt lies. So we know that she's contemplating it. Life without Romeo is no life at all, she seems to be saying. What will she do? Well, she turns to the nurse and she says to her in line 228, speakest thou from thy heart? Do you mean that? And the nurse says, and from my soul too, else beshrew them both. Not only from my heart, but from my soul also, else curse them both. And Juliet's response is one word, amen. If you know anything at all about Latin or just religion, you might know that the word amen means the Lord let it be so. In other words, it's as if the nurse has just finished a prayer. I'm speaking this from my heart and my soul, or else curse them both. And Juliet basically says, amen to that. And the nurse says, what? And Juliet then begins lying to the nurse. She's never done this before. She now lies to the nurse. Well, thou hast comforted me marvelous much. Go in and tell my lady I am gone, having displeased my father, to Lawrence cell, to make confession and to be absolved. Where will she turn? Well, to Romeo's confidant, the only person she has left. And if Friar Lawrence cannot give her any consolation or another plan, she's seriously considering suicide. How do we know that? The nurse says, marry I will, and this is wisely done. The nurse exits, and here we see Juliet at her weakest, saddest, most vulnerable point. She says, ancient damnation. She's talking about the nurse. O most wicked fiend, is it more sin to wish me thus forsworn, or to dispraise my lord with that same tongue which she hath praised him with above compare so many thousand times? Go, counselor, that's the nurse, thou and my bosom henceforth shall be twain. We're done. I'll to the friar to know his remedy. If all else fail, myself have power to die. I have one more thing to say about human psychology and William Shakespeare, his relevance, and the reason we study Shakespeare. If you don't think this story seems familiar, if you've never known someone, or if you've never been someone who has gone against your parents' wishes in order to date someone they didn't like, snuck around, lied about where you were going, made frantic statements about killing yourself. Um, you've certainly known somebody who's done that if it hasn't been you. The story's relevant, it's authentic, it bears the test of time. What's even more interesting to me is the fact that this is William Shakespeare writing. He was born in 1564, he died in 1616. This is long before the invention of modern psychology. I just looked up Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was born in 1856, 200 years after William Shakespeare. It's possible that Sigmund Freud read Shakespeare's plays and developed modern psychology based on the plays. They're so accurate. William Shakespeare tells stories that ring true because they are stories of human behavior and human psychology that actually sound like the sorts of things that would happen today. And so we see Juliet at her wits' end, desperate, running to Friar Lawrence's cell, hoping he can give her a plan. And the good news is Friar Lawrence has another plan. The bad news is Friar Lawrence is not very good at making plans. We've seen the nurse for the last time. Juliet is alone. We'll pick this up in Act 4 next time.